Nothing like a soggy company party to let secrets ferment. Rain hammered against the yacht club's picture windows, while I watched my wife Liora charm another room full of suits and cocktail dresses. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read her signals, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, how she touched someone's arm when she wanted their attention. Tonight, she was performing for an audience of one. "Brent, you simply must meet Cedric," she called out, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she reserved for public occasions. "This is Cedric Fallon. We've been working really closely together on the Vanton campaign." Cedric stepped forward with the kind of smile that belonged on a used car lot. Mid-30s, expensive suit, handshake that lasted 3 seconds too long. "Pleasure to meet you, Brent. Liora talks about you constantly." I bet she does. I kept my expression neutral while studying his face. This was the man whose name had been appearing on hotel receipts hidden in my wife's tennis bag for the past 6 months. "What exactly do you do for Senator Vanton?" "Campaign finance coordination. Complex stuff. Lots of late nights, weekend conferences." His eyes flicked toward Liora. "Your wife's nonprofit has been invaluable for donor outreach." Everyone laughed at the obvious innuendo. I laughed too, because what else do you do when your marriage becomes a public joke? But I had something better than anger. I had documentation. Janine Cross, our HR director, stood near the bar nursing a martini. I'd known her for 15 years, back when she was handling payroll disputes, and I was still running engineering projects. Now she managed personnel for a company worth $200 million, and she understood the value of proper documentation. I walked over with my phone already open to the photo gallery. "Janine, got a minute?" I handed her the device. "Interesting expense reports from our new consultant." She squinted at the screen, then looked up with raised eyebrows. "Same room number, 2 different client accounts?" "The Marriott downtown. Charged to Liora's charity foundation on Tuesday, billed to Vanton's PAC on Thursday. Same suite, same week." I kept my voice conversational. "Thought you might find the accounting irregularities fascinating." Janine's expression shifted from confusion to professional interest. "I'll need copies of these. Already in your email." Across the room, Cedric was regaling a small crowd with some story about campaign strategy. His gestures were animated, confident. He had no idea his world was about to implode. Liora appeared at my elbow. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" "Just business," I said. Janine was asking about expense account procedures. My wife's smile flickered for half a second, so brief that anyone else would have missed it. But I'd been watching her perform for decades. She knew I knew, and now she knew I was done pretending otherwise. The party continued around us, rain still beating against the windows. I made small talk with colleagues, complimented someone's wife on her dress, discussed quarterly projections with our CFO. Normal things. Meanwhile, Janine excused herself to make a phone call. By 10:30, the crowd was thinning. Cedric had positioned himself near the exit, clearly waiting for Liora. They thought they were being subtle. I intercepted him in the parking lot. "Cedric." The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the marina's dock lights. "Enjoying the party?" "Great event. Your company really knows how to treat people." He fumbled with his car keys, a Tesla that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. "Funny thing about treating people well," I said, stepping closer. "It requires basic honesty." His face went pale in the sodium lighting. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Hotel receipts, expense accounts, my wife." I kept my tone conversational. "You want to keep your teeth, Cedric? Then keep your hands off things you can't afford." Before he could respond, I dragged my house key along the Tesla's driver's side door. The scratch ran from headlight to tail light, a thin silver line that would cost thousands to repair. "Consider that a gift from HR," I said, dropping a condom wrapper on his windshield. "They'll be calling you Monday morning." I walked away without looking back. Behind me, I heard him cursing and fumbling with his phone. Let him call whoever he wanted. The documentation was already in motion. Monday morning, Cedric Fallon was terminated for expense account fraud and conflict of interest violations. Tuesday afternoon, Liora received divorce papers at her downtown law office. Wednesday, I found a sealed envelope waiting on my kitchen counter. Thick paper, my father's handwriting, postmarked 6 months after his funeral. "For Brent's eyes only" was written across the front in his careful script. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. "Son, if you're reading this," her mask finally slipped. "The cameras have been recording everything since my diagnosis. Watch the files, then decide what kind of man you want to be. Your choice. Love, Dad." I stared at the note for a long time. My father had been gone 8 months, taken by cancer that ate through him like acid. But apparently, he'd been preparing for this moment long before his final breath. The USB contained folders labeled by date going back almost a year. Security camera footage from every room in our house, living room, kitchen, even the master bedroom. My father had installed a surveillance system that would make the NSA jealous, and he'd been watching my marriage dissolve in real time. I clicked on the most recent folder. There was Liora, 3 weeks ago, pacing our living room while talking on her phone. The audio quality was crystal clear. "No, Cedric, he doesn't suspect anything. Brent's too trusting for his own good." Her voice carried that same artificial sweetness from the party. "The charity money is clean. We've been careful about the paper trail." The camera angle caught her profile as she laughed at something he said. This wasn't the woman I'd married 23 years ago. This was a stranger wearing my wife's face. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage. Cedric visiting our house when I was at work. Intimate conversations about moving money through the nonprofit. Plans to wait until after the election to handle the Brent situation. The final video was dated 2 days before my father's passing. He appeared on screen, adjusting the camera angle in his hospital room. Even with the oxygen tube and medication drip, his eyes were sharp. "Brent, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone," and Liora finally showed her true colors. "I've been recording everything for months. Her phone calls, her meetings with that campaign weasel, all of it." He coughed, then continued. "I know you loved her. Hell, I loved her too, like a daughter. But love doesn't excuse theft, and it sure doesn't excuse what she's planning to do to our family company." The video continued for another 10 minutes. My father had discovered financial irregularities in Liora's charity foundation, traced payments back to foreign donors, even identified specific campaign finance violations. He'd built a case that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. "The choice is yours, son. You can pretend you never saw this, or you can protect what we built together. But remember, sometimes the best way to find out who you are is to lose everything you thought you had." The screen went black. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, replaying the videos and reading through financial documents my father had compiled. By sunrise, I understood the scope of what Liora and Cedric had been doing. The charity foundation was a shell operation, laundering foreign contributions for Senator Orion Vanton's campaign. Every business trip, every late-night conference, every donor meeting had been cover for moving money that should never have entered American politics. But there was something else, something that made my stomach clench with a different kind of betrayal. In one video, Liora was talking about our daughter Maddie. "The timing worked out perfectly," she told Cedric. "Brent never questioned the pregnancy, even after his procedure. Men believe what they want to believe." I rewound the section 3 times before the implications sank in. Maddie was 17 years old, born 8 months after my vasectomy. We'd called her our miracle baby, a gift that defied medical explanation. Apparently, the only miracle was my own stupidity. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the night in my garage office, surrounded by financial documents and video evidence that painted a picture of systematic betrayal spanning years. Coffee had stopped working around 3 a.m., but I kept drinking it anyway. Liora found me there at 7:30, still wearing yesterday's clothes and probably looking like I'd been hit by a truck. "Brent, what are you doing out here?" She stood in the doorway wearing her jogging outfit, all concerned wife and morning routine. "You never came to bed." "Had some reading to catch up on." I gestured at the papers scattered across my workbench. Amazing what you can learn when you pay attention. Her eyes flicked over the documents, and I watched her face change as she recognized bank statements from her charity foundation. The mask was slipping again. "Those are private financial records. You had no right." Actually, I had every right. Turns out when your nonprofit lists me as a board member, I'm legally entitled to examine the books. I picked up a bank statement. Interesting deposits here. $47,000 from something called Baltic Maritime Consulting. Care to explain what Baltic Maritime does? It's complicated. Campaign finance law requires disclosure of foreign contributions, which you've been hiding through shell companies. I stood up, my back protesting after hours hunched over paperwork. "I've already contacted the Federal Election Commission. They're very interested in your accounting methods." Liora's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand what you're doing. This could destroy everything. My career, the foundation, Maddie's college fund." Maddie. I let the name hang in the air between us. "Let's talk about Maddie." Something in my tone made her take a step backward. "Good. She should be afraid." "I've been thinking about our miracle baby," I continued. "Born 8 months after my vasectomy, which the medical records confirm was completely successful. Either she's the next Virgin Mary, or you've been lying to me for 17 years. The color drained from her face. "Brent, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been passing off another man's child as mine? That you've been stealing money from cancer patients and veterans through your fake charity? That you've been planning to divorce me and take half of everything my family built?" She straightened, and for a moment I saw the real Liora, cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. "You can't prove any of that." I pulled out my phone and played a video clip. Her voice filled the garage. "The timing worked out perfectly. Brent never questioned the pregnancy, even after his procedure." Her face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Dad installed security cameras before he passed. Months of footage, Liora. Every phone call, every meeting with Cedric, every conversation about screwing over the family that welcomed you with open arms." I paused the video. "He knew what you were planning, and he documented everything." She lunged for the phone, but I'd expected that. I stepped aside and let her stumble into the workbench, scattering papers across the concrete floor. "Those recordings are illegal, invasion of privacy. No court would—" "Actually, they're perfectly legal. Maryland is a one-party consent state, and since Dad owned the house, he had every right to record what happened inside it." I pocketed the phone. "But don't worry about court proceedings. I'm not planning to wait that long." The garage door rumbled open behind her. Eddie Kowalski, my head mechanic, arrived for his usual early shift. He took one look at the scene, scattered papers, Liora's tear-streaked face, my obvious exhaustion, and quietly started organizing tools at the far end of the shop. "We'll finish this conversation later," Liora said, trying to recover her dignity. "When you're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly, for the first time in years, actually." I sat back down at the workbench. "By the way, you might want to check your office voicemail. The State Bar Association called yesterday. Something about an ethics investigation." She left without another word. Through the window, I watched her jog back toward the house, her pace faster than usual. Probably planning damage control, or maybe just planning to run. Eddie approached with 2 cups of coffee from the shop's ancient machine. "Rough night, boss?" "You could say that." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Eddie, what do you know about campaign finance law?" "About as much as I know about quantum physics." "Why?" "Because I'm about to become an expert. and I might need help with some research. I gestured at the scattered documents. Ever heard of something called a straw donor scheme? For the next 2 hours, Eddie and I went through every piece of evidence my father had compiled. The mechanic had a sharp eye for details, probably from years of diagnosing engine problems, and he spotted patterns I'd missed. "Look here," he said, pointing at a series of bank transfers. "Same amounts, same dates, but the money's bouncing through 3 different accounts before it hits the campaign." "Money laundering," I confirmed. "Foreign donors can't contribute directly to American campaigns, so they use intermediaries to hide the source." "And your wife's charity is one of the intermediaries?" "The main one, looks like. They've been funneling millions through her foundation, then distributing it to Vanton's PAC as domestic contributions." Eddie whistled low. "That's federal crime territory, isn't it? Multiple federal crimes. Campaign finance violations, money laundering, tax fraud, conspiracy." I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of sleepless hours. "The question is what to do about it." My phone buzzed with a text from Liora. "We need to talk. Meet me at home at noon. Don't do anything stupid." I showed the message to Eddie, who snorted. "Little late for that advice, isn't it?" "Yeah, about 17 years too late." At 11:30, I drove home to find Liora waiting in our living room with someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s wearing a business suit and a serious expression. "Brent, this is Patricia Hawkins, my attorney," Liora said without preamble. "We need to discuss the situation rationally." "The situation," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Patricia opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Mallory, my client is prepared to offer a generous settlement agreement. Full custody of your daughter, half of all marital assets, and a confidentiality agreement regarding any alleged irregularities in the Foundation's accounting." Alleged irregularities. I sat down across from them. That's an interesting way to describe felony money laundering. "The Foundation's activities are completely legal," Patricia continued smoothly. "Any suggestion otherwise is based on misinterpretation of complex financial regulations." I pulled out my phone and started playing another video clip. Liora's voice filled the room. "The Baltic Maritime money needs to be split into smaller transfers. Anything over 50,000 triggers reporting requirements." Patricia's professional composure flickered. "Mr. Mallory, where did you obtain that recording?" "Security cameras. All perfectly legal, all admissible in court." I paused the video. "Want to hear the part where she discusses hiding Cedric's payments through fake consulting contracts?" Liora leaned forward. "Brent, please. Think about Maddie. Do you really want her to grow up knowing her father destroyed her mother's life over a misunderstanding?" "Her father?" I let the question hang in the air. "Which father would that be, Liora?" Patricia looked confused, but Liora understood exactly what I meant. Her face went pale again. "I'll be requesting DNA testing as part of the divorce proceedings," I continued, "along with a full forensic audit of the Foundation's finances. Should be interesting to see what turns up." "You're making a mistake," Liora said quietly. "If you push this, I'll have no choice but to defend myself. False accusations, harassment, maybe even domestic abuse allegations. Your reputation will be destroyed." "My reputation?" I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. "Liora, by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the state will have copies of these recordings. Your charity scam will be front-page news, and Cedric's campaign finance operation will be under federal investigation. But sure, let's worry about my reputation." Patricia was frantically taking notes. "Mr. Mallory, I strongly advise against releasing any materials to the media. The legal ramifications are already in motion. I contacted the FBI this morning. It was a lie, but a useful one. They're very interested in foreign interference in American elections." Liora stood abruptly. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Check your phone. Cedric should be getting some interesting visitors right about now." She pulled out her phone and started dialing. I watched her face change as the call went to voicemail, then change again when she tried a second number. "He's not answering," she said, more to herself than to us. "Probably busy explaining campaign finance regulations to federal agents," I suggested. "I hear they're very thorough with their questions." Patricia closed her briefcase. "Mrs. Mallory, I think we should postpone this meeting until we have more information about the federal investigation." After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by 23 years of shared memories. Wedding photos on the mantel, family vacations captured in frames, Maddie's school pictures tracking her growth from kindergarten through junior year. All of it built on lies. My phone rang. Eddie. "Boss, you need to turn on Channel 7 right now." I found the remote and switched to the local news. A reporter stood outside the downtown federal building, talking into a microphone while official-looking people moved in the background. FBI agents raided the campaign headquarters of Senate candidate Orion Vanton this afternoon, seizing computers and financial records related to allegations of illegal foreign contributions. The investigation reportedly centers on a local nonprofit foundation that may have been used to launder overseas donations. The screen switched to file footage of Liora at a charity gala, smiling and shaking hands with donors. The caption read, "Liora Mallory, Executive Director, Chesapeake Community Foundation." My phone started ringing. First reporters, then colleagues, then neighbors who'd seen the news. I let them all go to voicemail. Around 6 p.m., Maddie came home from school. She found me in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Dad? What's going on?" "There are news trucks outside, and Mom's not answering her phone." I looked at my daughter, 17 years old, honor student, captain of the debate team, everything good I thought I'd helped create. She had Leora's eyes but Cedric's nose, and now that I knew what to look for, the resemblance was obvious. "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk." Telling your daughter that everything she's believed about her family is a lie ranks somewhere between root canal surgery and tax audits on the scale of pleasant experiences. Maddie took it better than I expected, which probably said more about her strength than my delivery. "So, you're not my biological father," she said after I'd explained everything. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework for years, where we'd celebrated birthdays and discussed college applications. "And Mom's been stealing money through her charity." That's the simplified version, yes. She was quiet for a long moment, processing information that would have sent most adults into therapy. "Are you going to stop loving me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Maddie, listen to me very carefully. You are my daughter in every way that matters. I changed your diapers, taught you to ride a bike, helped you with calculus homework that made my brain hurt. DNA doesn't change any of that. But legally, I'm pursuing adoption proceedings. If you want me to, that is. Your biological father is about to face federal charges, and your mother—" I paused, choosing words carefully. "Your mother made choices that have consequences." "Is she going to prison?" "I don't know. Probably not if she cooperates with the investigation. But her career is over, and she'll likely face civil penalties that will wipe out most of her assets." Maddie nodded slowly. At 17, she was old enough to understand that actions have consequences, even if those consequences seemed disproportionately harsh. "What happens to me?" "You finish high school, go to college, become whatever you want to become. I'll make sure you have everything you need." I reached across the table and took her hand. "The only thing that's changing is you'll finally know the truth about your family. And you'll know who you really are when everything else is gone," she said quietly. I stared at her. "What did you say?" "Something Grandpa used to tell me. He said sometimes you have to lose everything you think you have to find out who you really are." She squeezed my hand. I think he was preparing me for this. My father had been preparing all of us, apparently. Even from the grave, he was still teaching lessons about character and consequences. That evening, Liora returned home with 2 suitcases and a defeated expression. The news coverage had been brutal. Federal raids, campaign finance violations, foreign money laundering. Her charity foundation was under investigation, her law license was under review, and her picture was on the front page of every newspaper in the state. "I'm staying at my sister's place," she announced, setting the suitcases by the front door. "My attorney says it's better if we don't live together during the investigation." "Probably wise," I agreed. "Less chance of witness intimidation charges." She flinched at that. "I never meant for it to go this far. The charity was supposed to help people. Cancer research, veterans programs, educational scholarships. The campaign money was just supposed to be temporary." "Temporary theft is still theft, Liora. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Cedric said if we didn't help with the campaign financing, the charity would lose its major donors. Everything we'd built would disappear. So you decided to build it on a foundation of lies instead." I gestured toward the living room where Maddie was presumably doing homework and pretending not to listen. "How long were you planning to keep lying about her parentage?" "Forever, if necessary. You're a good father, Brent. Better than Cedric ever would have been. I thought it was better for everyone if you never knew. Better for everyone or better for you?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she picked up her suitcases and headed for the door. "I'll be in touch about custody arrangements." "Actually, you won't." I pulled out a folder of legal documents. "Maddie's 17. In Maryland, she gets to choose which parent she lives with. She's already made her choice." Leora's face crumpled. "She chose you." "She chose honesty. Maybe you should try it sometime." After she left, I found Maddie in her room, staring at her laptop screen. She'd been researching adoption law and DNA testing procedures, approaching her family's implosion with the same methodical intelligence she applied to debate tournaments. "Dad?" She looked up from the computer. "I want to legally change my name. Not my first name, but I want to be Madison Mallory officially. No hyphen, no reference to Mom's maiden name, just Mallory." "Are you sure? That's a big decision." "Grandpa always said a name should mean something. Mallory means something. It means integrity and hard work and taking care of people." She closed the laptop. "Mom's name doesn't mean anything anymore." I sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of responsibility that comes with raising someone else's child as your own. "You know this is going to be difficult, right? The news coverage, the investigation, people at school asking questions. Let them ask. I'd rather deal with difficult truth than comfortable lies." She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like my father, determined, uncompromising, ready to face whatever came next. Besides, I learned from the best. The next morning brought more news coverage and more phone calls from reporters. I'd become a minor celebrity overnight. The wronged husband who'd exposed a major campaign finance scandal. The story had everything the media loved: political corruption, marital betrayal, foreign interference, and a blue-collar hero taking down the establishment. Eddie arrived at the garage with a stack of newspapers and a grin. "Boss, you're famous. Look at this headline. Auto shop owner uncovers $1 million campaign scam." "Great. Just what I always wanted. To be a public figure. Could be worse. At least they're calling you the good guy." He spread the papers across my workbench. "Your wife and that Cedric fellow aren't getting such friendly coverage." The articles painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning multiple campaigns and election cycles. Cedric's operation had been moving foreign money through charitable foundations for years, with Leora's organization being just one of several fronts. The FBI had traced connections to campaigns in 3 different states, with total illegal contributions exceeding $15 million. "Says here Cedric's been arrested," Eddie noted, reading from the Washington Post. Conspiracy, money laundering, violation of campaign finance laws. They're talking about 20 years in federal prison. What about Liora? Still under investigation, but her attorney says she's cooperating fully with federal agents. Eddie looked up from the paper. Think she'll flip on the whole operation? She'd flip on her own mother if it meant avoiding prison time. I started organizing tools, needing something to do with my hands while my brain processed the magnitude of what I'd set in motion. The question is whether her cooperation will be enough to save her. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Pier 19 tonight at 8. Come alone. C. I showed the message to Eddie, who frowned. Cedric? Thought he was in federal custody. Maybe he made bail. I stared at the phone. Or maybe someone else is using his phone. Either way, meeting him alone sounds like a terrible idea. Probably. But I want to hear what he has to say. That evening, I drove to the marina where this whole mess had started. Pier 19 was at the far end of the yacht club, poorly lit and mostly deserted after sunset. Cedric was waiting by the water, looking nothing like the confident campaign operative from the company party. His expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt, and he hadn't shaved in days. Brent, thanks for coming. Cedric, surprised you're not in a federal holding cell. Bail hearing this morning, $2 million, which pretty much wiped out everything I had left. He stared out at the dark water. Your recordings destroyed everything, you know that? My recordings documented what you and my wife were already doing. I just made sure the right people saw the evidence. The right people. He laughed bitterly. You have any idea how many lives you've ruined? Campaign staffers who had nothing to do with the money laundering, charity workers who thought they were helping cancer patients, donors who believed in what we were building. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started breaking federal law. Maybe you should have thought about Maddie before you decided to play hero. He turned to face me, and I saw desperation in his eyes. She's my daughter, Brent. Biologically, legally, she's mine. I could fight for custody. You could try, but fighting for custody from federal prison is generally unsuccessful. I might not go to prison. If I cooperate, provide information about the other campaigns, the prosecutors might be willing to negotiate. And then what? You think Maddie wants a relationship with the man who destroyed her mother's life and lied to her for 17 years? I think she deserves to know her real father. The conversation was interrupted by footsteps on the wooden pier. Two figures approached from the direction of the parking lot, Liora and a man I didn't recognize. As they got closer, I realized the stranger was wearing a badge. Detective Morrison, Baltimore PD, the man said, showing his credentials. Mr. Mallory, we need to talk. About what? About threatening behavior toward a federal witness. He gestured toward Cedric. Mr. Fallon here claims you've been harassing him, trying to intimidate him into changing his testimony. I looked at Cedric, then at Liora, understanding immediately what was happening. Let me guess. He's planning to testify that the money laundering was all his idea, and Liora was an innocent victim who got manipulated into helping. Something like that, Detective Morrison confirmed. But if you've been threatening him, I haven't threatened anyone. This is the first time I've seen Cedric since the night I keyed his car. I pulled out my phone. But since we're all here, maybe you'd like to hear some of the recordings that started this investigation. Those recordings were obtained illegally, Liora said quickly. Invasion of privacy, violation of wiretapping laws. Actually, they're perfectly admissible. Maryland law is very clear about recording conversations on your own property. I started playing a clip. Leora's voice filled the night air. Cedric's right about the money trail. If anyone investigates, we need to make sure all the documentation points back to the Baltic maritime accounts. Detective Morrison listened with growing interest. Mrs. Mallory, that doesn't sound like the testimony of an innocent victim. The recordings are taken out of context, she protested, edited to make conversations sound like something they weren't. These are raw files, straight from the security cameras. No editing, no manipulation. I handed the phone to Morrison. There are hours of similar conversations, all documenting a systematic conspiracy to violate federal campaign finance law. Cedric stepped forward. Brent, let's make a deal. You stop pushing for maximum prosecution, and I'll make sure Maddie knows I don't want custody. She can stay with you, keep your name, whatever you want. You think I need your permission to raise my daughter? She's not your daughter. Genetically, legally, she's mine. I could complicate things if I wanted to. That's when I lost my temper. I grabbed Cedric by the shirt and shoved him backward toward the edge of the pier. He stumbled, arms windmilling, and for a moment I thought he might fall into the dark water below. Instead, he caught his balance and stood there breathing hard, fear replacing the arrogance in his eyes. Listen carefully, I said, my voice low and controlled. Maddie is my daughter in every way that matters. I've been her father since the day she was born, and I'll keep being her father until the day I pass away. You're nothing to her except a genetic accident and a source of pain for her mother. Brent, stop, Liora pleaded. You're making this worse. I'm making it clear. I released Cedric's shirt, but didn't step back. You want to threaten custody battles? Go ahead. But remember that every court hearing will be public record, and every news outlet in the country will be covering the story of how a federal criminal tried to steal a child from the man who actually raised her. Detective Morrison moved between us. That's enough. Mr. Mallory, step back. I stepped back, but kept my eyes on Cedric. You have nothing to offer Maddie except shame and regret. Stay away from my family, or the next conversation we have won't be this polite. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You're about to be a convicted felon with no money, no career, and no future. What exactly do you think you can provide for a 17-year-old girl? Cedric looked at Liora, then at Detective Morrison, then back at me. Whatever he saw in my expression convinced him that pushing further would be unwise. Fine, he said quietly. I won't pursue custody, but I want visitation rights. You want to explain to Maddie why you helped destroy her family? I shook my head. Good luck with that conversation. The meeting ended with Detective Morrison taking statements from all of us. No charges were filed. Apparently, shoving someone on a pier doesn't constitute assault if no one gets hurt, and everyone agrees it was just a heated discussion between concerned parents. As we walked back to the parking lot, Liora fell into step beside me. This doesn't have to be a war, Brent. We could work something out, find a way to protect Maddie from the worst of this. The way to protect Maddie was to not commit federal crimes in the first place. That ship has sailed. I know you hate me right now, but please don't let that hatred hurt our daughter. My daughter, I corrected, and I'm not the one who hurt her. I'm just the one who stopped pretending everything was fine. She didn't have an answer for that. 3 weeks later, the federal investigation had expanded into a multi-state task force examining campaign finance violations across a dozen different races. Cedric had indeed cooperated with prosecutors, providing detailed information about money laundering operations spanning multiple election cycles. In exchange, his potential sentence had been reduced from 20 years to 8, assuming he continued to provide useful testimony. Liora was facing a different kind of reckoning. The State Bar Association had suspended her law license pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Her charity foundation had been dissolved, with remaining assets being distributed to legitimate organizations. Most devastating of all, the morality clause in my father's will had been triggered by her adultery conviction in our divorce proceedings. The Mallory Construction Company, built by 3 generations of my family, would pass entirely to me. Liora's potential 50% stake, worth roughly $100 million, was forfeit. She didn't take the news well. This is vindictive and you know it, she said during our final settlement conference. We were sitting in a sterile conference room at my attorney's office, surrounded by stacks of financial documents and legal briefs. Your father wrote that morality clause specifically to punish me. My father wrote that clause to protect the family business from exactly this kind of situation, I replied. He believed that character mattered, especially when it came to managing a company that employed 300 people. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to lose everything. You didn't lose everything. You threw it away. I gestured at the documents spread across the table. Every choice that led to this moment was yours, Liora. The affair, the money laundering, the lies about Maddie's parentage, all of it. Her attorney, a different one this time, cleared his throat. Mr. Mallory, my client is prepared to waive all claims to marital assets in exchange for a modest settlement, $2 million to be held in trust for Maddie's education and future needs. Maddie's education is already provided for. College fund, graduate school if she wants it, whatever she needs to build her own life. I looked directly at Liora. You don't get to buy your way back into her good graces. I'm her mother. You're the woman who lied to her for 17 years about who her father was. There's a difference. The settlement was finalized that afternoon. Liora received $50,000, enough to start over somewhere else, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. Everything else, including our family home, remained with me and Maddie. That evening, I found my daughter in the garage, helping Eddie rebuild the engine on a 1967 Mustang. She'd been spending more time at the shop lately, learning about carburetors and transmission systems with the same methodical intelligence she applied to everything else. How did the meeting go? She asked, not looking up from the engine block. It's over. Officially divorced, assets divided, custody arrangements finalized. I picked up a wrench and joined them at the workbench. Your mother will be moving to Richmond next month. New job, fresh start. Good for her. Maddie's tone was carefully neutral. Did she ask about me? She asked if you wanted to maintain contact. I told her that was your decision to make. And what's my decision? I studied her face, looking for clues about what she was feeling. At 17, she was already more emotionally mature than most adults I knew, but she was still a kid, dealing with the collapse of everything she'd believed about her family. That's something you need to figure out for yourself. She's your biological mother, regardless of everything else that's happened. If you want a relationship with her, I'll support that decision. Even after everything she did? Even then. Forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's behavior. It's about not letting their mistakes define your future. I handed her a socket wrench. But forgiveness doesn't require trust, and it doesn't require pretending that lies were actually truth. Eddie looked up from the engine. For what it's worth, kid, your dad handled this whole mess better than most people would have. Could have gotten ugly, but he kept it focused on facts and consequences. Could have gotten uglier, I corrected. Still might, depending on what happens with the federal case. Speaking of which, Eddie said, you see the news about Senator Vanton? I hadn't. We'd been too busy with settlement negotiations to follow the expanding investigation. Withdrew from the race this morning. Campaign finance scandal finally caught up with him. Eddie wiped his hands on a shop rag. Turns out your wife's charity wasn't the only front they were using. FBI found connections to shell companies in 6 different states. How much money are we talking about? $47 million in illegal foreign contributions over 4 election cycles. Eddie whistled low. Biggest campaign finance scandal in state history. Maddie looked up from the engine. So Mom wasn't just stealing a little bit of money. Your mother was part of a systematic operation to undermine American democracy, I said bluntly. Foreign governments were buying influence in our elections, and she helped them do it. Jesus. Maddie sat back on her heels. No wonder the FBI was so interested. Language, I said automatically, then caught myself. Actually, given the circumstances, I think stronger language is probably appropriate. That got a smile out of her. the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "Dad, I've been thinking about the adoption papers." "What about them?" "I want to do it officially. Legal name change, new birth certificate, everything." She stood up and faced me directly. "I want to be Madison Mallory, daughter of Brent Mallory, with no legal connection to anyone else." "Maddie, that's a permanent decision. Once we file those papers, I'm sure Cedric Fallon is a criminal who helped destroy our family. I don't want his name on my birth certificate, and I don't want any legal relationship with him." She paused. "You're my real father in every way that matters. I want the law to recognize that." I looked at this remarkable young woman who'd somehow emerged from the wreckage of my marriage with her integrity intact and felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with genetics. "Then we'll file the papers tomorrow." Eddie grinned. "Sounds like cause for celebration. How about dinner at Murphy's Pub? My treat." "Can we invite Mrs. Henderson?" Maddie asked. "She's been asking about you, Dad, and I think she's interested in more than just checking on the neighborhood." Mrs. Henderson was our next-door neighbor, a widow in her 50s who'd been bringing casseroles and asking pointed questions about my post-divorce social life. She was attractive, intelligent, and completely uncomplicated, everything Liora hadn't been. "Maybe we should focus on getting through the adoption process before we start planning my social calendar," I said. "Dad, you're 46 years old. You're allowed to have a life after Mom. Your father's allowed to take his time, too," Eddie added diplomatically. "No rush on anything." But as we cleaned up the shop and prepared to head to dinner, I found myself thinking about the future for the first time in months. The investigation would eventually end, the news coverage would fade, and life would return to something resembling normal. Maddie would graduate high school, go to college, build her own career and family. The construction company would continue growing, providing jobs and stability for hundreds of families. And maybe eventually, I'd be ready to trust someone again. "Dad?" Maddie was waiting by the door. "You coming?" "Yeah," I said, turning off the lights. "I'm coming." 6 months after the federal investigation began, Cedric Fallon was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, money laundering, and violation of campaign finance laws. He'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors, providing testimony that led to indictments in 3 states and the exposure of foreign influence operations spanning multiple election cycles. Liora received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation in exchange for her cooperation and agreement to pay substantial civil penalties. The financial restitution wiped out her remaining assets, leaving her with nothing except a fresh start in Richmond and a job with a small nonprofit that specialized in helping ex-offenders reintegrate into society. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Senator Orion Vanton faced RICO charges and a federal investigation that would likely end his political career and send him to prison for the rest of his life. The foreign influence operation he'd helped facilitate was being called the largest attack on American electoral integrity since Watergate. And Maddie officially became Madison Mallory, with a new birth certificate listing me as her father, and no mention of Cedric Fallon anywhere in her legal history. "How does it feel?" I asked her, as we left the courthouse after the final adoption hearing. She was holding the official documents, studying them with the same intensity she'd once applied to calculus homework. "Like everything finally makes sense," she said. "Like the paperwork matches reality for the first time." We drove home through downtown Baltimore, past the federal building where the investigation had started, past the yacht club where I'd first confronted Cedric, past the law office where Liora had once practiced before her world collapsed. The city looked the same, but everything felt different. At home, we found Eddie waiting in the driveway with Mrs. Henderson, whose first name I'd finally learned was Catherine. They were sharing a bottle of champagne and what appeared to be a very animated conversation about engine restoration techniques. "Congratulations," Catherine called out as we approached. "Eddie told me about the adoption hearing. How did it go?" "Officially official. Maddie announced, waving the documents. I am now legally, completely, and permanently a Mallory. That calls for a celebration, Eddie declared. I brought the good stuff. He gestured at the champagne bottle. Well, the relatively good stuff. It's from a gas station, but the label's fancy. We spent the evening on the back porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I'd lived for 20 years. Catherine had brought homemade lasagna and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Maddie's college plans and my ideas for expanding the construction business. She was easy to talk to, uncomplicated in ways I'd forgotten were possible. What's next? She asked, as Maddie and Eddie argued good-naturedly about baseball statistics. Now that all the legal drama is behind you? Normal life, I hope. Running the business, watching Maddie graduate, figuring out what comes after 17 years of raising someone else's kid. I paused. Though she's not someone else's kid anymore, is she? She never was, from what I can tell. Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Showing up every day does. That's what my father used to say. He believed that character was about the choices you made when things got difficult. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Even as he was passing, he was still teaching lessons about integrity and consequences. I gestured toward the house behind us. He knew what Liora was up to months before I did, but he gave me the space to uncover it for myself. Why? Because he understood that some lessons can't be taught. They have to be learned through experience. I sipped the gas station champagne, which was actually better than I'd expected. He could have confronted Liora himself or warned me about the affair, but then I never would have learned what I was capable of when everything fell apart. And what were you capable of? I thought about that for a moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a complacent husband and father, content to let my wife handle the family's social obligations while I focused on running the business. I'd trusted without questioning, believed without verifying, and assumed that 23 years of marriage meant something more than legal paperwork and shared assets. I was capable of fighting for what mattered, I said finally. For Maddie, for the family business, for the truth about what my marriage had actually become. Any regrets? About exposing the money laundering? About the divorce? About destroying Liora's career? I shook my head. No regrets about any of that. She made choices, and choices have consequences. But I regret that Maddie had to learn that her entire childhood was built on lies. I regret that she'll always know her biological mother chose money and political influence over family integrity. And I regret that it took a federal investigation to teach me to pay attention to what was happening in my own house. Catherine reached over and squeezed my hand. You can't protect people from the truth forever. Eventually, reality has a way of asserting itself. Dad, Maddie called from across the porch. Eddie wants to know if you're planning to ask Catherine to the company picnic next month, or if you're going to keep pretending this isn't a date. I felt my face flush. Maddie, that's not. It's totally a date, Catherine said cheerfully. And yes, I'd love to go to the company picnic. Fair warning, though, I'm very competitive at three-legged races. Eddie raised his champagne glass. To new beginnings and honest relationships. To families that choose each other, Maddie added. To finding out who you really are when everything else falls apart, I concluded, echoing my father's words. We clinked glasses as the sun disappeared behind the houses across the street. Somewhere in Richmond, Liora was starting over with nothing except the consequences of her choices. Somewhere in federal prison, Cedric was learning that political influence doesn't mean much when you're wearing an orange jumpsuit. And somewhere in Washington, prosecutors were still unraveling the foreign influence operation that had corrupted American democracy for nearly a decade. But here on my back porch, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be part of my family, everything felt exactly as it should be. Dad? Maddie was looking at her adoption papers again. I want to frame these and hang them in my dorm room next year. Why? Because they prove that sometimes the best families are the ones you build yourself, one honest choice at a time. I looked at my daughter, legally, officially, and permanently my daughter, and realized that my father had been right about everything. Sometimes you do have to lose everything you think you have to discover who you really are. And sometimes, what you discover is better than what you lost.